She spent years searching for the boy who once promised to take her away. But when she finally finds him living on the streets, he doesn't recognize her. And when the truth comes out, he walks away. Will she lose him forever? Or will this be their last chance to rewrite the past? The scent of caramelized sugar filled the air as Noah Dawson carefully wrapped a batch of homemade candy in wax paper. The streets of New York were bustling, people moving like waves between the towering buildings, their faces blurred by the urgency of life. Beside him, Emily Carter counted the coins they had collected so far, her small hands trembling slightly from the winter chill. "Not enough," she murmured, biting her lip. "We still need more if we want to eat tonight." Noah exhaled, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Then we keep selling." They were both 12 years old and had learned early that the world was not kind to kids without homes. Together, they survived on street smarts and sheer willpower, working tirelessly to avoid the shelters that separated orphans like them. Their only safe place was each other. As the afternoon stretched into evening, they made their way toward the train station, a place that had become their secret refuge. There, beneath the rusting beams and flickering lights, they sat on the cold metal benches and watched the departing trains with wide, hopeful eyes. "One day," Noah said, pointing at the tracks, "we'll be on one of those, heading somewhere far away. Somewhere better." Emily turned to him, skeptical but wanting to believe. "How do you know?" Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled paper, a faded train ticket advertisement he had picked up from the ground weeks ago. "Because I'm going to buy us tickets. I don't know how long it'll take, but I swear to you, Emily, we'll leave this place together." Emily stared at the paper, her throat tightening. No one had ever made a promise to her before. Not one that they meant to keep. "You promise?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Noah met her gaze, his brown eyes steady and full of certainty. "I promise." The words settled deep in her heart, a warmth against the cold reality of their lives. But life was unpredictable, and fate was cruel. That night, as they huddled in their usual alley, sirens blared in the distance. Before they could react, 2 social workers appeared, their expressions firm but kind. "Emily Carter," one of them called. Emily's heart pounded. She turned to Noah, panic rising. "No, Emily, it's okay," one of the women said. "We've found a home for you." She shook her head violently, gripping Noah's hand like a lifeline. "I don't want to go. Please." But they were stronger, pulling her away as she kicked and screamed. "Noah!" she cried, desperation filling her voice. Noah fought, trying to hold on, but he was just a kid. He wasn't strong enough. The last thing he saw was Emily being led into a car, her tear-streaked face disappearing behind the closing door. The city swallowed her whole, and just like that she was gone. Noah stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs like a desperate knock on a locked door. The train ticket advertisement slipped from his fingers, fluttering to the wet pavement. He had made a promise, but promises were worthless if you had no way to keep them. The city had not changed, but Noah Dawson's world had. Years passed, and the once determined street boy had become just another invisible figure among the countless lost souls of New York. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by the weight of time and hardship. Meanwhile, Emily Carter's life had taken a different path. She had been adopted by a middle-class family who gave her warmth, education, and stability. They weren't rich, but they offered her something she had never known before: a chance. And Emily had taken that chance with both hands. Now, at 26, she was the proud owner of Carter Events, an up-and-coming event planning company that catered to high-profile clients. Her office was in a sleek glass building, and her schedule was filled with meetings, contracts, and business deals. She had everything she had once dreamed of, yet something was missing. She often caught herself staring out the window of her high-rise office, watching the streets below. The ghost of a promise still lingered in her heart, whispering in quiet moments when she least expected it. She had searched for Noah. For years, she had scoured every corner of the city, checked shelter records, and even hired a private investigator at one point. But he had vanished. Maybe he had found his way out. Maybe he had boarded a train, just as he had promised. Maybe he was happy somewhere far away. She told herself that over and over again, but she never quite believed it. Elsewhere, under the same city lights, Noah sat on the cold pavement, gripping his violin. The instrument was old, its varnish scratched and its strings worn, but it was his only possession that mattered, the only thing that kept him connected to the world. As the sun set, he lifted the bow and played. His fingers moved instinctively, drawing out a melody that had lived inside him for years. Soft, haunting, filled with something that felt like longing. People walked past him, some dropping coins, others not even sparing him a glance. It didn't matter. He didn't play for money. He played to remember. Because when he closed his eyes, he could still hear Emily's voice. Still feel the weight of her small hand in his. Still see the promise he had failed to keep. But promises didn't matter anymore. Not when you were a man who had lost everything. That night, across the city, Emily attended a lavish corporate gala, a celebration for a partnership between Carter Events and an elite hotel chain. Dressed in an elegant black gown, she smiled, laughed, and played the role expected of her. But even surrounded by luxury, she felt alone. As the night wore on, she excused herself, slipping out onto the quiet streets, needing air, needing something real. That's when she heard it. Melody. Faint but achingly familiar. Emily's heart stopped. She turned toward the sound, stepping closer, until her gaze landed on a man sitting on the sidewalk, playing a violin. The song. The way he held himself. The raw emotion in every note. She knew. Noah. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. But Noah didn't look up. Didn't recognize her. He just kept playing, completely unaware that the girl he had once promised to save was now standing right in front of him. Emily stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. It was him. Noah Dawson. The boy who had once been her whole world. But he wasn't a boy anymore. The Noah she had known was full of fire, a dreamer with eyes that held the promise of a better future. The man sitting before her now was different. His shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. His clothes worn and layered for warmth. His hands, once full of life, were calloused from survival. Yet the way he played, that hadn't changed. Emily swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest as she stepped forward. She wanted to call his name, to make him look up, to see his expression when he realized who she was. But then she hesitated. Would he even recognize her? Would he be angry? Would he think she had abandoned him? Her fingers curled into fists. She had looked for him. She had tried. But now that he was here, sitting right in front of her, she didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. Instead, she reached into her clutch and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, placing it gently into his violin case. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Noah's music stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Noah's music stopped. His fingers hovered over the strings as he stared at the bill. His brows knitted together, and a flicker of something crossed his face. Discomfort, frustration, maybe even shame. Emily's pulse quickened as his fingers closed around the money, but instead of pocketing it, he held it for a second, then let it flutter to the pavement. Rejection. Her stomach twisted. Without looking up, Noah muttered, "I don't need charity." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. He still hadn't seen her. He didn't even know she was standing there. She bent down, picking up the bill and hesitating before placing it back inside the violin case. Gentler this time. "I wasn't giving you charity," she whispered. "I just wanted to hear you play a little longer." Noah stiffened. For a second, just a second, it looked like he might glance up. But instead, he let out a low breath and set his bow back against the strings. The melody resumed. Emily's throat tightened. He wasn't ready. Not yet. So she stepped back into the shadows, watching for a moment longer before turning and walking away. But as she disappeared into the crowd, Noah paused. Something about her voice, something familiar, echoed in his mind. His fingers hesitated on the strings, his heart tightening for reasons he couldn't quite place. He looked up, but by then she was already gone. Noah sat on the cold pavement, his violin resting in his lap, fingers still hovering over the strings. His heart was beating faster than it should have been. It was the voice. Soft, familiar, almost ghostly, like a memory trying to surface after years buried under dust and regret. But that was impossible. Emily was gone. Gone in the way that people like him never got back. She had escaped this life, and no one who escaped ever looked back. Noah exhaled, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the thought. The woman, whoever she was just another stranger feeling sorry for a street musician. That's all it ever was. And he didn't need pity. Gritting his teeth, he picked up the $100 bill she had left behind, staring at it as if it mocked him. Then, without hesitation, he crumpled it in his fist and shoved it into his pocket. Because despite his pride, despite everything, he still needed to eat. Across the city, Emily couldn't stop thinking about him. Sitting at her desk, she was supposed to be reviewing contracts, but all she could see was Noah's face. His hollowed cheeks, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he had refused her money. The Noah she had known would have never let anyone hand him a free pass. He had too much pride. And yet, there he was, sitting on the streets, playing for change. Didn't make sense. She had spent years looking for him. Years thinking he had left New York, that he had found a way to build the life they had dreamed about. But he was here. He had been here all along. And the worst part, he didn't even know she had never stopped searching. Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. She couldn't just walk away. She wouldn't. The next day, Emily arrived at the cafe near Central Park earlier than usual. She had arranged to meet Peter Calloway, her business partner, and the man who, if she let him, could easily become something more. Peter was everything Noah wasn't. Polished, well-spoken, charming in a way that made her life feel easy. He greeted her with a smile. "You're early. That's a first." She forced a small laugh. "Couldn't sleep." He leaned in, eyeing her carefully. "You seem distracted." Emily hesitated. She should have brushed it off. But something inside her wanted to say it out loud, as if doing so would make it feel real. "I found someone yesterday," she admitted. "Someone I thought I'd lost a long time ago." Peter's brows lifted. "Old friend?" She nodded slowly. "Something like that." He leaned back, studying her. "Well, whoever they are, they must have meant a lot to you." She swallowed, nodding. Peter exhaled, setting his cup down. "Listen, Em. You know I care about you, right?" She blinked, caught off guard by his sudden shift in tone. Yes, of course." Peter hesitated. "Then maybe take my advice. Some ghosts from the past. They're better left buried." Emily's stomach twisted. He didn't know he was talking about Noah, but somehow it still felt like a warning. Emily spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but her mind refused to let go of Noah. Her past and present were colliding in a way she had never expected, and now that she had found him, truly found him, she couldn't ignore it. But what was she supposed to do? Walk up to him and say, "Hey, remember me? The girl you once swore you'd never leave. The one who searched for you for years, only to find you living on the streets." She knew Noah. He was proud. If she confronted him now, after all this time, he wouldn't accept her help. She had to be careful. She had to be smart. That evening, the restaurant opportunity. Emily picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Hey, Grace," she said as soon as her best friend and business associate answered. "I need a favor." Grace Holloway was one of the few people in Emily's life who had been there since the beginning of her career. She was sharp, resourceful, and most importantly, she never questioned Emily's instincts. "I'm listening," Grace said. "There's a violinist, a street musician, incredibly talented. I need you to set up a live music gig at Maison du Clair this weekend and make sure he gets the offer." There was a pause. "A street musician? What's this about?" Emily hesitated. I think he deserves a chance." Grace sighed. You always had a thing for strays. Emily smiled despite herself. Please just trust me on this. After a long pause, Grace relented. All right, I'll talk to the manager. But he better be as good as you say he is. Emily exhaled in relief. He is. Meanwhile, across the city, Noah sat by the fire escape of an abandoned building, tuning his violin under the dim streetlights. The cold wind bit at his skin, but he had learned long ago to ignore it. The hunger, the exhaustion, the loneliness, they were all just part of the rhythm now. He had stopped expecting miracles. So when a well-dressed restaurant manager approached him the next day, handing him a business card and an offer for a live music gig, his first instinct was skepticism. Maison Duclair. Noah read aloud, frowning. You sure you got the right guy? The manager nodded. Client recommended you. They insisted you deserved a real stage. Noah's grip on the card tightened. A client. Anonymity was requested, the man said with a small smile. But let's just say, someone out there believes in you. Noah didn't know what to say. For years, the world had looked right through him. Why now? He wasn't sure what game was being played, but he wasn't about to walk away from an opportunity. Because deep down, a small part of him still believed in second chances. The warm glow of Maison Duclair bathed the upscale restaurant in golden light. The air was filled with soft murmurs of conversation, clinking glasses, and the gentle hum of anticipation. Emily sat at a corner table, her fingers tapping lightly against the stem of her wine glass as she waited. Tonight was the night. Noah was about to play in front of a crowd that actually mattered. People who could recognize his talent, who could give him the opportunities he had been denied for years. But she wasn't just here to watch. She was here to see his reaction when he realized the truth. Backstage, Noah adjusted his shirt cuffs, feeling strangely out of place in a venue this polished. He had borrowed the shirt and slacks from the restaurant's spare collection, but no amount of fabric could hide the rough edges of someone who had spent years on the streets. He exhaled sharply. It didn't matter. Tonight it was just him and the music. A hostess peeked inside. Mr. Dawson, you're up. Noah nodded, gripping his violin, the weight of it grounding him. He stepped onto the small performance stage in the center of the restaurant, his heartbeat steady but fast. Then, as he lifted his gaze to scan the audience, he froze. Emily, sitting at a table near the back, her expression unreadable, but her eyes locked on him. Noah's breath hitched. For a second, the past came rushing back. Cold nights on the streets, sticky caramel between their fingers, whispered promises at the train station. His chest tightened. It was her. But why? Why was she here? Why now? A storm of emotions swirled inside him. Anger, confusion, something dangerously close to hope. But he buried it, forcing his fingers to move, placing the violin under his chin. The bow touched the strings, and he played. Emily's perspective. The moment Noah started playing, the restaurant fell silent. Emily could feel it. The raw emotion in every note, the unspoken words woven into the melody. He played like a man who had nothing left but his music, and it was heartbreaking. She had been right. He wasn't lost. He wasn't broken. He was still Noah. But when his song ended and the audience erupted into polite applause, his gaze returned to hers. And this time he didn't look away. Emily's breath caught. He knew. He finally knew. And the look in his eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was betrayal. Noah stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing in his ears, but he barely heard it. His pulse pounded as he made his way through the restaurant, his violin clutched in one hand. His gaze locked onto her. Emily. He hadn't said that name in years, had forced himself to forget it. Yet here she was, sitting in a place like this, watching him like she had orchestrated this entire thing. Noah didn't stop to think. He just walked straight to her table. Emily had barely risen from her chair before he was standing in front of her. You did this, he said, his voice tight. Emily swallowed. Noah, You set this up, he cut her off. His fingers curled around the violin case at his side. The money in my case. The restaurant gig. It was all you, wasn't it? Emily hesitated. Then softly, yes. Noah let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Why? Because she stopped herself, choosing her words carefully. I saw you that night, Noah. I didn't plan this. I didn't expect to find you. But when I did, I had to help. Help! He let out a dry laugh. Is that what this is? A charity project? Emily flinched. Of course not. Noah took a step back, running a hand through his hair. His mind raced. This didn't make sense. She had left. She had been gone for so long that he had convinced himself she was part of a past that no longer existed. And yet, here she was, acting as if she could just waltz back into his life and fix things. You disappeared, he muttered. His voice quieter now but laced with something raw. You left, Emily. I searched for you. Waited. And now you show up after all these years. Dropping money in my case like that makes up for anything. Emily's throat tightened. Noah, I never stopped looking for you. He froze. For the first time since she had found him, Noah actually hesitated. I looked for you everywhere, Emily continued. I checked shelters, asked around, even hired a private investigator once. I thought you left New York. I thought. She swallowed. I thought maybe you found a better life. Noah's chest rose and fell sharply. She had searched for him. She hadn't forgotten. But the years had been cruel, and even now, he wasn't sure if he could believe her. Why didn't you tell me sooner, he asked. His voice quieter now, almost broken. Emily reached out, as if wanting to touch his hand, but she hesitated. Because I didn't know how. A beat of silence stretched between them. Then Noah let out a breath, stepped back and shook his head. This was a mistake. Emily's stomach dropped. Noah! But he was already turning away, walking toward the door. And this time, Emily was the one watching him disappear. Emily sat frozen in her chair, watching Noah walk away. Her heart pounded. Her hands clenched into fists against the tablecloth. No, not again. She had already lost him once. She wasn't going to let it happen a second time. Ignoring the stares from the other patrons, she pushed back her chair and ran after him. Outside the restaurant, the night air was crisp, the distant hum of the city filling the silence between them. Noah! Emily called, her heels clicking against the pavement as she caught up to him. He kept walking. Please just stop. At that, Noah halted. His shoulders tensed before he slowly turned around. There was no anger in his face now. Only exhaustion. Why are you doing this? His voice was quiet, his gaze unreadable. What do you want from me, Emily? She took a deep breath. I don't want to lose you again. He let out a humorless laugh. Lose me? You found me on the sidewalk, Emily. I was never gone. I was just invisible. Her chest tightened. I never stopped looking for you. You keep saying that, Noah murmured. But where were you when I needed you? Emily stepped closer. I was a kid, just like you. They took me away, Noah. I didn't have a choice. For the first time, Noah really looked at her. She wasn't the same girl he had once known. Gone were the oversized sweaters and scuffed shoes. Now, she stood in front of him in an elegant dress, like she belonged to a world so far from his that it barely seemed real. And yet, her eyes, they were the same. The same eyes that had once stared at him across a train platform, full of hope. The same ones that now stared at him with desperation. Noah swallowed hard. Why do you care, Emily? I'm not the person you remember. I don't have a future. I barely have a present. Emily shook her head. That's not true. You still play, Noah. And you still have the same fire inside you that you always did. She hesitated, then reached into her clutch and pulled something out. Train ticket. Noah stared at it. It was identical to the one he had once promised her. A promise he had failed to keep. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. You once told me we'd leave this place together. His throat tightened. Could he trust her? Could he trust himself? The train whistle echoed in the distance. And Noah knew he had to decide. Noah stared at the train ticket in Emily's hand. The small piece of paper felt impossibly heavy, as if it carried the weight of every moment they had lost. He should have taken it immediately, should have grabbed it and run toward the station without hesitation. But instead he stood there, his body rigid, his mind screaming at him to turn away. Emily saw the hesitation in his eyes. "You don't have to be afraid," she said softly. "This isn't charity. It's a choice. A chance to start over." Noah exhaled sharply. "And if I don't deserve a second chance?" Emily's heart clenched. "Then take it anyway." The sound of a distant whistle cut through the night. The train was coming. Emily took another step forward, pressing the ticket into his hand. "Come with me, Noah." His fingers curled around the paper, but he didn't move, because this was more than a train ride. This was leaving behind everything he had known. Leaving behind the version of himself that had learned to survive in the shadows. The man who had nothing. The man who expected nothing. Could he really walk away from that? Could he be someone new? Noah's throat tightened. His whole life had been built around one rule. Never expect too much, because hope only leads to disappointment. But then he looked at her. And for the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a curse. Felt like Emily. Like the warmth of her hand in his when they were kids. Like the promise of a train that would take them away. And suddenly, Noah didn't want to be left behind. Not again. Not when she was standing right in front of him, offering him everything he had stopped believing in. The train whistle screamed. Emily turned toward the platform, her pulse hammering, waiting for him to take the first step. She climbed onto the train, then turned back, eyes locked onto his. Noah felt his entire body tense. This was it. His chance. And for once in his life, he refused to let it slip away. He ran. His feet hit the pavement hard as he sprinted forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily reached out her hand just as he jumped onto the train. He caught it, fingers tightening, holding on this time. Breathless, Noah looked into her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The train doors slid shut, and together they left the past behind. The train rumbled beneath them, the steady rhythm of the tracks, a heartbeat pulling them forward. Noah sat by the window, his violin case resting against his legs, his fingers absently tracing its worn edges. The city lights of New York faded into the distance, swallowed by the darkness of the night. For the first time in years he was moving. Beside him, Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, but her presence filled the space between them. She didn't rush him to speak, didn't demand answers. She just waited. Noah exhaled slowly. "I never thought I'd leave that city." Emily turned to him, studying his face in the dim glow of the train's interior. "Why did you stay?" He thought about it. "Because it was all I knew," he admitted. "And after a while, when you've spent so long in one place, you start believing there's nowhere else to go." Emily's eyes softened. "But you left." Noah finally looked at her. "Because you reminded me that I could." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was full. Full of everything unspoken, everything lost and found again. Noah shifted, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what happens next." Emily smiled softly. "That's the best part." He let out a short laugh. "You always were the hopeful one. And you always were the one who made the impossible seem real," she countered. "You promised me once that we'd leave together." Noah let out a slow breath, then glanced down at the train ticket still crumpled in his palm. "Guess I finally kept my promise." Emily reached over, gently taking his hand. "You did." Outside, the first traces of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. New day. A new beginning. Noah turned toward Emily, his grip tightening around hers. "Where are we going?" he asked. She laughed. "Does it matter?" Noah thought about it. For the first time in a long time, The future wasn't something to fear. It was something waiting to be written. A melody, unfinished but full of possibility. He tapped his fingers against the violin case and smirked. "Then I guess it's time to start playing again." Emily's smile widened. And as the train carried them forward, Noah Dawson finally understood what it meant to be free. Noah and Emily's story isn't just about love. It's about second chances, about finding the courage to break free from the past and embrace the unknown. But ask yourself, if you were given the chance to rewrite your story, to fix what was lost, would you take the risk? Or would fear keep you standing still, watching the train leave without you? Click the video on the screen now to continue your journey of self-discovery and redemption. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another lesson in love, resilience, and the power of never giving up. See you in the next one.